Officer to ask the Scottish Government what progress has been made in encouraging employers to pay the real living wage.
Minister Richard Lockhead.
Good progress has been made in promoting payment of the real living wage in Scotland, and last month saw living wage accredited employers increase to just over 2,700, which is proportionally 5 times higher than the rest of the UK. And this means that some 55,000 workers have more wages in their pockets due to employer accreditation. And under our regionally focused Making Living Wage Place scheme, we've seen Edinburgh City, for instance, announcing their accreditation as a Making a Living Wage Place in November last year during Living Wage Week. And our Living Hours Accreditation Scheme continues to grow, with 4 accredited employers achieving Living Hours accreditation since its launch late in 2021.
Marie McNair.
I thank the Minister for that answer. I welcome the continued efforts to help promote a living wage. The Minister will agree that an unambiguous commitment from employers to pay the living wage and recognise trade unions in the workplace is a strong platform to being a decent employer and providing a fair and productive work environment. Does the Minister also agree with me and the STC that this Parliament must have control over employment law to fully be able to embed decent employment rights by setting a real living wage and ending the exploitative use of zero-hour contracts?
Minister.
I think the member's right, and of course it's very timely to raise this issue given we are just experienced the pandemic and the implications for many employees in Scotland and reflecting their experiences, and of course we're now facing a cost of living crisis. So now is the time to reflect on the powers this Parliament has to support workers and ensure they receive a decent wage for their work. 85% of Scots do receive a real living wage, but of course if we had employment powers we could do a lot more about that to ensure 100% of Scottish employees get a decent wage. And the other issues that the members mentions, of course, could be addressed if we had powers in this Parliament.
Thank you. Question number 2, Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the delivery of the missions of the Scottish National Investment Bank.
Cabinet Secretary Kate Forbes.
Over the last 18 months, the bank has built up an operational structure. It's recruited over 60 staff and it's delivered investment commitments of over £200 million to 16 projects across all 3 of their missions, leveraging in over £450 million of additional private funding.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. In light of Professor Ross Brown's warnings on the 23rd of May that the Scottish National Investment Bank will continue to flounder and ultimately fail if its missions remain so broad and incoherent, will the Scottish Government commit to providing the bank with a clear mission to drive high value-added industrial growth and advanced manufacturing in Scottish-owned firms instead of investments in things like a forestry fund aimed at high-net-worth clients seeking tax-efficient structures?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, 2 caveats I would make is that I think all members, if I recall correctly, agreed that the bank should retain operational independence. And secondly, I think, if I remember correctly, that all parties agreed with the missions that were set for the bank. And obviously, as a start-up, I think the bank has done an incredible job, not just building its operations, but also ensuring that that pipeline of investments are going out the door. In the last 18 months, they have made 8 investments in the Net Zero mission, 4 investments in the Place mission, 4 investments in the Innovation and People mission. I guess one question I'd have to Mr Sweeney is, which mission does he think we should drop rather than adding more missions to it?
Question number 3, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on progress towards its commitment to deliver a free laptop or tablet to every school child in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Anne Somerville.
We are committed to ensuring every child has access to a device and connectivity by the end of this parliamentary term. We have already provided £25 million to councils, resulting in over 72,000 pupils receiving a device and 14,000 receiving an internet connection. We know that a number of local authorities have also invested in technology, and they have indicated that in total almost 280,000 devices have been or are in the process of being distributed to learners. This is a complex and ambitious commitment. We are currently looking at the available infrastructure in schools to support the wider rollout of technology, and we are taking work forward in partnership with the local government colleagues and have convened a joint partnership board with COSLA to oversee the work.
Murdo Fraser.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her response? During the period of COVID restrictions, we had pupils doing home learning who would have benefited from access to a free laptop or tablet, and many of them did not have that access. The Cabinet Secretary is now saying this will not be completed as a programme until the end of this Parliament. That means that there are pupils currently in S2 or S3 who will be leaving school without benefiting from this programme. Is the Cabinet Secretary being serious in saying we're going to have to wait another 4 years before this commitment is actually delivered?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, our manifesto was very clear that the commitment was for the parliamentary term. That's what we are committed to do. And I would contrast that with the recent Tory manifesto for the local elections, which contains no timescales and no commitment for a device for every child. So the Tories had an opportunity and a chance to lay out their alternative. They did not. In the meantime, Presiding Officer, we will get on delivering on our manifesto commitment.
Question number 4, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what it's doing to support the mental health and well-being of officers and staff within Police Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Keith Brown.
It is essential that mental health and wellbeing support is provided to police officers and staff at the point of need, and I welcome the initiatives being undertaken by Police Scotland, the employer, to support its workforce. The Scottish Government has provided funding to the Lifeline Scotland Wellbeing Programme, which provides tailored online resources for blue light responders, volunteers and their family members, and this includes provision of £97,864 this financial year. We are currently considering a proposal from Lifelines for further funding support in 22-23.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. Official statistics indicate that officers and staff within the force have missed over 77,000 days during 21-22. And the Police Federation have stressed that levels of officers and staff are now reaching critical stage and officers are leaving in droves, Cabinet Secretary. The SNP Scottish Government has handed Police Scotland a further real-term budget cut of 8%. Therefore, what action is taking place to reverse this decline and do all we can to ensure that we maintain, retain and support our police forces?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, had Alexander Stewart done his homework, he'd have found out that the reason for the reduction in police force numbers is to do with COP26 and with COVID, both of which have limited the ability for the police to undertake training of new officers at Tullyallen because it was being used for other purposes. The police will tell them that. And he asked what else we were doing. Well, we're going to pay our police officers more than the Tories pay the police officers that they've got control over. We are going to have more police officers for our population than there are in England and Wales. And we are going to impose the Tories' imposition of a 5.2% cut in our budget this year, which limits how much we can do. We are doing the things which help police officers, as opposed to the Tories who have undermined and under-resourced the police in England and Wales.
Willie Rennie.
2 years ago, one-third of officers were saying they were going to work mentally unwell. We've already heard that thousands of days have been lost to work over the last 2 years because of mental health. Yet ministers said they were very satisfied with the mental health support that was being provided. This week, when I spoke to Callum Steele from the Scottish Police Federation, he told me the situation was still dire. So when will ministers stop being satisfied and actually get on and improving the service?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I would say that I've mentioned the work we've done in relation to the initiatives that we've already funded for the police for this year, and we'll fund again, we're considering furthering again for next year. But Willie Rennie will know also that we have access to Police Scotland's 24/7 Help Employee Assistance Programme, the EAAP, and also the Trauma Risk Management Programme. So it's not the case that we say that everything that can be done is being done. Of course, as Callum Steele would also argue, we should continue to look to improve the services that we provide. And of course we recognise the special pressures which COVID have presented for the police. The police have done a fantastic job throughout the COVID period, and we want to continue to support them. So we're not saying we have done all that we can do. Of course it's the responsibility of the employer, which is Police Scotland, with the role for the SPA, but we will continue to help them wherever we can to protect the well-being of our officers.
Question number 5, Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I draw members' attention to my register of interest, which shows I'm an owner of a private rented property in North Lanarkshire. To ask the Scottish Government what the support capacity of Home Energy Scotland was before this was increased by 12,000 households.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Matheson.
In 2021-22, Home Energy Scotland had capacity to provide advice and support to more than 120,000 unique households. through more than 400,000 advice interactions. As a result of increased funding in 2022-2023, Home Energy Scotland advisers have the capacity to provide support to 132,000 unique households through 440,000 advice interactions.
Mark Griffin.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. And while he mentions the figure increasing to 132,000 unique households, the capacity to reach low-income, potentially fuel-poor clients hasn't increased proportionally with that increase of 12,000. Action, I think, this summer is critical with the price cap going up in the autumn. Can I ask the Government if they have written to every group that is eligible for the Warmer Home Scotland since the cap went up in the spring, and how many installations the Government expect to deliver from those 44,000 calls?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I think his latter point is referring to the 440,000 calls or interactions, and obviously it's a demand-led service, and it depends on the needs and the circumstances of those individuals and where they what might be the best route of support for them. In relation to those who are most vulnerable, one of the aspects that we have been able to augment with Home Energy Scotland is access through to the Energy Carers Service, which is a specific service to help those who are most vulnerable, who may not be able to take advice and support through telephone or by online services, where actually a care advisor will visit them and provide advice and support in their home. That's particularly targeted at those who are extremely vulnerable, in order to meet the very type of concerns which the member has. However, if the member has a particular issue or an experience from a constituent where he believes that we could take further action, I'd be more than happy to look at that matter to make sure we're doing everything we can to support households.
Fiona Hislop.
The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that older people will be most vulnerable when it comes to facing spiralling energy bills, with fixed incomes, often living in older, energy-inefficient housing. And according to Age Scotland, 55% of over 55s they surveyed were unaware of the Scottish Government's schemes to assist with energy efficiency. So what steps is the Scottish Government taking to ensure that there is more proactive targeting of older households in the increased resource being made available to Home Energy Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I'm always open to looking at what more we can do to help to promote the work of Home Energy Scotland. The principal way in which much of the work is taken forward is through trusted partners, so whether it be health and social care organisations, whether it be food banks or other charities or local authorities who provide a referral pathway into Home Energy Scotland, and that's where the vast majority of the referrals come from. And as I also mentioned, we have augmented the support for Home Energy Scotland to provide energy care service support to those who are most vulnerable and may not be able to take advice online or over the phone. But if the member has, again, any specific examples of constituents who are not being able to access services or believes that there's further action we could take to promote these services, I'm always open to looking at these matters.
Question number 6, Rhoda Grant.
To ask the Scottish Government how it is strengthening transport links to rural areas.
Minister Jenny Gilruth.
Ambitions for future transport infrastructure investment in rural areas are highlighted in the 45 recommendations contained in the Second Strategic Transport Project Review, or STPR2. The recommendations included investment in ferry replacements and port upgrades to improve their resilience and reliability. We also intend to consider 2 potential fixed links in the Western Isles, as well as a link between Mull and the mainland. SCPR2 provides the necessary evidence base required to help secure the future funding of these projects, including those that have the potential to transform the way that we travel in rural areas.
Rhoda Grant.
Due to ScotRail's emergency timetable, it's impossible for people from Caithness to get the train to attend hospital appointments in Inverness. The reimbursement mileage is woeful at 15 pence a mile and doesn't adequately cover their costs. How will the Minister ensure that no patient is missing out on healthcare due to the lack of public transport in the area?
Minister.
Well, of course, as the member will know, ScotRail's emergency timetable has arisen as a result of drivers refusing to work on their rest days. I'm very grateful that ASLEF have since recommended that the pay deal is accepted, and of course it will now go to a referendum to members. I have asked ScotRail to look at how we might be able to reinstate the normal timetable as quickly as possible, noting of course that ScotRail have already reintroduced a number of services. On the specific point that Ms Grant has raised around about reimbursement, I'd be more than happy to address that with ScotRail and to write to the member with more detail on that, noting some of her concerns in this area.
Evelyn Tweed.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Bus passengers across rural Stirling are experiencing last-minute cancellations, especially on services X10, 38 and 51. First Bus advise there is a shortage of bus drivers. Can the Scottish Government advise what more can be done to address these shortages and other issues affecting the industry?
Minister.
So there's currently a shortage of HGV drivers for buses and lorries due to the pandemic creating a backlog of testing and training, and that has of course been exacerbated by Brexit in preventing people from the EU coming here to work freely. We have repeatedly sought a formal role in determining what occupations are in the shortage occupation list in respect of our representations, but the UK Government has denied this. Bus drivers are not included in the SOL list, and I understand the UK Government will be reviewing this later in the year, and we have asked for full involvement in that process. This is clearly causing, though, issues in relation to local and national bus services right across the country. We've provided up to £210 million of funding to support bus services during the pandemic and an additional £40 million to support recovery for this year. I've asked Transport Scotland for urgent advice additionally on why so many services now appear to be being cancelled due to shortages and how that service changes are impacting on communities more broadly.
Graham Simpson.
Thank you. Can I just take the opportunity to congratulate the Minister on her recent marriage? She mentioned funding. The Network Support Grant Plus has been keeping bus operators afloat, particularly in rural areas, but it's due to end next month. And industry experts have said this could lead to a cut of 20% on some routes, rising fares and depot closures. So bus operators are calling for that fund to be extended at its current rate by 3 months, and that would allow passenger levels to recover. Will the Minister agree to that?
Minister.
I'm aware of the issues that the member has raised, and I thank him for his well wishes. In relation to the funding, of course, some of the funding associated with the support grants did relate to the pandemic, and it was always due to come to an end at some point. However, I have asked officials in Transport Scotland to see what more we might be able to do to support rural bus services.
Question number 7, Jim Fairley.
Officer, I'd like to ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the continued use of Asialox for bracken control.
Minister Lorna Slater.
An emergency authorisation for the use of the herbicide product Asialox has been submitted for bracken control for 2022. The Health and Safety Executive, HSE, are considering the application on behalf of all UK administrations, and this process is ongoing. I have spoken to stakeholders directly over the last week, and I understand the difficulties associated with bracken control and the current key role that Asialox plays. As part of these discussions, I have indicated that it is important for government to work with stakeholders to explore options for more sustainable forms of bracken control in the future.
Jim Fairley.
Thank the Minister for that answer. And I'm very happy to hear that the Minister has met with stakeholders, and I'm reassured she is aware of just how damaging bracken is, not just to the environment but to animal health and for the potential of very serious accidents involving land managers when trying to manage bracken using land-based methods such as bracken busters on challenging hill land. And I've been asked by my constituents to emphasise to the Minister that while the HSE continue with their deliberations on whether to grant the extension, that they will be looking to the Scottish Government to protect their interests, the environments they manage and the health and well-being of themselves and their staff. So can I ask the Minister to meet with me urgently in order to discuss what assurances she can give to my constituents who are in the position of having a serious ongoing bracken problem to deal with and no safe method of doing so other than aerial applied Asialam?
Minister.
I would be very happy to meet with the member to discuss this important issue and understand the concerns that the member and his constituents are raising. I would like to reassure him that in considering the emergency application for the use of Asulux, I have sought out views from stakeholders, including those who currently use Asulux for bracken control. Just last week, I met with the NFU Scotland, Nature Scot, Scottish Forestry and the RSPB to hear their views, and they have all made their positions clear. I will continue to work closely with stakeholders and the other UK administrations to explore options for sustainable forms of bracken control.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. Before we move on to First Minister's questions, I invite members to join me in welcoming to the gallery Mr Max Hiegelsberger, President of the State Parliament of Upper Austria. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1 I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The SNP government have said they want to hold another divisive independence referendum in October next year. But Nicola Sturgeon can't even say if ferries will float by then. She won't have closed the school attainment gap by then. She won't have returned NHS services to normal by then. And she won't have cleared the court backlogs by then. So, First Minister, why should all these pressing issues play second fiddle to another divisive independence referendum next year?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, Presiding Officer, let me welcome Douglas Ross's line of questioning. It is at least an implicit, if not yet an explicit, recognition that, yes, people in Scotland will have their say on independence. In line with the democratic mandate that this Parliament has. Second point, Presiding Officer, is that the case for independence is not distinct or separate from the big challenges that Scotland, in common with countries across the world, is facing right now. Instead, independence is part of the solution to those challenges. It is about how we equip ourselves better as a country to meet those challenges and fulfil our potential. It's not the distraction that Douglas Ross wants to pretend it is. Instead, it presents an alternative to a failing UK system. A failing UK system that gives us, right now, a Prime Minister with no democratic or moral mandate in Scotland, that has given us a Brexit we did not vote for, that is giving us the highest inflation in the G7, the lowest projected growth in the G20, with the sole exception of Russia, that is constraining our public finances and tying the hands of this government. And, of course, a UK system that gives us the obscenity of a government that tries to shore up its own base by deporting vulnerable people to Rwanda. Utterly immoral. So independence is an alternative to that, and it gives this Parliament additional powers to navigate those challenges and to meet the full, massive potential of this country.
Douglas Ross.
What a depressing answer from the First Minister. Never once responding to the points about education, about our NHS, about the justice system.
We will hear Mr Ross. Thank you.
Never once responding to these issues that are pressing for people across Scotland right now, which will be playing second fiddle to an independence referendum, because we know that the First Minister cannot focus on improving our country when she is trying to divide it all over again. And we can see right now what happens when this SNP government is distracted. The census was a shambles, because the Constitution Secretary, looking up to the sky, maybe for some divine inspiration, was too busy updating the UK bad bar charts to actually count the number of people in Scotland. That's what happens when time and resources are thrown squarely behind things that really should matter. Mistakes are made, and the people of Scotland are the ones who suffer. Let's look at Scotland's NHS. Waiting lists are continually hitting record highs across our health service, from A&E to cancer diagnosis. Patients are waiting years for essential treatment. First Minister, why doesn't Scotland's NHS deserve your full focus right now?
First Minister.
These issues have my full focus, but since Douglas Ross has raised them, first I'm going to come on point by point to take on the issues that Douglas Ross has raised, and he should listen carefully to that. But firstly, he talks about bar charts. What every one of these bar charts showed in the publication that we produced on Tuesday of this week is that across 10 different countries with different characteristics, but all of them independent, across Europe, comparator countries to Scotland, they are wealthier, they are fairer, they have better well-being than Scotland as part of the UK. They make the case for Scotland becoming an independent country. But let me of course, set out the ways in which this government is using our current powers and in doing so making the case for more power. So let's look at the economy. In the most recent quarter, Scotland's GDP grew, the rest of the UK contracted. Unemployment right now is lower in Scotland than in the rest of the UK. Unlike the rest of the UK, Scotland has a positive trade balance in goods with the rest of the world. We have the position as the top performing
We will hear the First Minister
outside of London.
First Minister. We will hear the First Minister. Thank you.
Business research and development up under this government by 99.5% compared to under 30% in the rest of the UK. Let's turn to schools. According to the OECD, Scotland has the highest proportion of 25 to 65-year-olds in the UK with post-secondary education. Of all UK nations, we have the highest number of teachers. We have the highest number of schools per 100,000 pupils. On the last exam day, we saw higher passes at the highest level in the history of devolution. Access to university. The Independent Fair Access Commissioner says that Scotland has set the pace with regard to fair access across the UK. And of course, we've got free tuition in Scotland. And finally, Presiding Officer, on justice, recorded crime at one of the lowest levels since 1974, down 41% under this government. And lastly, Presiding Officer, health and social care. We have record staff numbers, higher staff numbers than other parts of the UK, and we have the best paid staff anywhere in the UK. If that's what we can do with the powers of devolution, imagine how much better we can do with the powers of independence.
Douglas Ross.
The First Minister's answers are as selective as her bar charts, because, yet again, nothing about the attainment gap. What happened, First Minister, to that being your #1 priority? And now 2 questions about the NHS and 2 answers that never mention our NHS, because these issues are put on the back burner. These issues are put on the back burner. These issues for the SNP and the SNP government are put on the back burner when they have set a date for an illegal referendum in just 16 months' time. Nicola Sturgeon is distracted all over again, and we know what happens next. Every time the SNP campaign for another referendum, Scotland's drug deaths spiral. The First Minister has admitted it herself.
Members.
The First Minister has admitted it herself. She took her eye off the ball and people lost their lives. And the latest figures show Nicola Sturgeon's drug death scandal remains the worst in Europe. We've brought forward a solution that we could implement straight away. Our Right to Recovery Bill now has cross-party support. Nicola Sturgeon's government could throw its weight behind it, and we could pass that bill now, this year. So, First Minister, why should a referendum bill be passed before you sort out Scotland's drug death scandal?
First Minister.
Firstly, on drugs death, I have said, and people listening to these sessions of First Minister's questions will have heard me say this, we will look very sympathetically at Douglas Ross's bill when Douglas Ross publishes that bill. We can't do that until the bill is published. So I hope we can find consensus and agreement. There have been some concerns raised about what might be in the bill by experts. There are other experts who have voiced real support for it. So that willingness to work together is there. Of course, we're investing £250 million over this Parliament to tackle drug deaths, and while there is no room for complacency, we've seen in recent statistics a reduction in the number of drug deaths, suspected drug deaths over the months to March 2021. Going back to other aspects of Douglas Ross's question, he said bizarrely that in my previous answer I didn't mention the NHS or the attainment gap. I mentioned both. I pointed to the Commissioner for Fair Access. A core part of tackling the attainment gap is to reduce that in access to university, and the Independent Commissioner has described our progress as an unambiguous success. I also mentioned the NHS, the fact that we have record staff numbers and the best paid staff anywhere in the UK. Lastly, Douglas Ross should really stop. There is a real desperation at the heart of Douglas Ross's approach to independence. It's very telling, isn't it, that he is so terrified of the substantive debate on independence, so terrified of the verdict of the Scottish people on independence, that he's reduced to somehow trying to pretend that democracy in Scotland is illegal. It is not a question of whether this government respects the rule of law. We do and always will. The question is Douglas Ross a Democrat? And I think the glaring answer to that is no.
Douglas Ross.
First Minister, your priorities are all wrong at the worst possible time. It is a crucial moment right now for public services and our economy. We've just gone through a pandemic. War in Europe has hiked energy prices. There is a global cost of living crisis. It's time for us all to pull together and focus on improving public services, on creating jobs, on restoring schools, on fighting crime, on supporting our NHS. Scotland has the potential to rebuild stronger. A focus on our recovery is what the Scottish people overwhelmingly want. A focus on our recovery. That's what Scottish people overwhelmingly want, not a referendum. We need a strong government for all of Scotland, but we're getting a weak campaign group for the nationalist minority that values grievance over governing. First Minister, why is the SNP's obsession with a referendum next year more important than the priorities of people across Scotland right now?
First Minister.
Independence is about ensuring that we can better meet the priorities of the Scottish people and deal with those challenges. Because what Douglas Ross needs to reflect on is that so many of these challenges that he has outlined are being exacerbated right now in Scotland because we are not independent. Brexit, taken out of the EU against our will. Brexit is why we are suffering the highest inflation in the G7, the lowest growth in the G20 apart from Russia. It's why we are seeing constrained budgets. That's Brexit, and that happened to Scotland because we are not independent and people across the country are paying the price of it right now. Independence is the solution. And lastly, Presiding Officer, because we are not independent, we currently have a Prime Minister that even Douglas Ross, well, this is the case today, it might not be tomorrow, doesn't think is fit for office. The Prime Minister that the ethics advisor, the second ethics advisor to Boris Johnson, who has resigned, has said this morning that the Prime Minister has placed him in an impossible and odious position. Douglas Ross seems to agree with Christopher Geidt that Boris Johnson is putting him in an odious position. The difference between Douglas Ross and Christopher Geidt is that Christopher Geidt has the decency and honour to resign.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, today Audit Scotland has published the latest in a series of damning reports uncovering the SNP government's failures. It shows the government made over 300 spending announcements during the COVID pandemic, but failed to monitor how that money was spent. Over 40% of the additional funding for health and social care that came through Barnett consequentials has not been spent. And the First Minister said at the election that her priority was COVID recovery, but Audit Scotland say there are billions of pounds of COVID money being held back while our public services, businesses and workers are crying out for support. Why is COVID recovery no longer your priority? Why has this money not been spent? And will you guarantee that every penny will be spent on rebuilding Scotland?
First Minister.
That is not what this morning's Audit Scotland report shows. It's a very good, positive report, and we'll pay very close attention to the recommendations it makes. So let me share some of what the Audit Scotland report actually says. The Scottish Government spent more on dealing with the pandemic, £15.5 billion, than was allocated through consequentials by the UK Government. The report actually only goes up to December 2021, not to the end of the financial year. So, of course, at that time, some of the money is unallocated. And, of course, the pandemic is not completely behind us. So we need to continue, without now the consequentials to support it, we need to continue to support the economy and our public services. The report also says the Scottish Government managed its overall budget effectively, that the Scottish Government developed some specific schemes that were unique in the UK. They didn't exist anywhere else in the UK. We acted with the essential urgency and speed. We relied on established systems to detect and to reduce any fraud in the system, and that we worked well with partners across the country. Yes, it suggests some lessons that we should learn, and with all aspects of the pandemic, we will make sure we learn those lessons.
Anna Sarwar.
For the first time, the First Minister is denying the reality in the report. What it refers to is money that was committed but not spent. And it makes clear about reserves that, yes, it's a good thing to build reserves, but using emergency money to do it is not. It's the equivalent of taking a payday loan and putting it in your current savings account. It doesn't work and it isn't good for Scotland. But this isn't the first time that Audit Scotland have highlighted this government's incompetence. As is typical with this SNP government, there is a culture of contempt for anyone who dares ask a difficult question or exposes an inconvenient truth. Even when it's one of your own, they close ranks and give them a slap on the wrist instead. And now, in the face of uncomfortable truths about their financial mismanagement, SNP figures are openly talking of, I quote, clipping the wings of Audit Scotland. They've already cut their budget by nearly a fifth since they came to power, and the spending review makes clear there are year-on-year of cuts to come. Isn't it the case that Nicola Sturgeon is cutting Audit Scotland's budget because it makes it harder for them to do their job, it makes it harder for them to expose this government's failures, and it makes it easier for her to get away with it?
First Minister.
Oh dear, I thought Anna Sarwar might have done some basic homework before coming to this chamber. I've got some news for Anna Sarwar on that point. The Scottish Government doesn't actually set the budget for Audit Scotland. The budget for Audit Scotland is independently funded through the Scottish Parliament, and the audit fees that public bodies pay for it.
Members, I would have thought you might. Members, Mr Sweeney,
the figures.
Members, I'm sorry, I cannot hear a word the First Minister is saying, and I'm sure that we would all like to hear this session. First Minister.
I'm not sure Anna Sarwar will want to hear this, but I certainly want him to. The figures in the spending review in relation to Audit Scotland are illustrative, because we have to have illustrative figures, but they don't replace the independent processes whereby this Parliament scrutinises and determines the budget of Audit Scotland. That's just basic stuff that I would have thought a leader of an opposition party might have known. Secondly, on reserves, the reserves were fully utilised as part of the 21-22 budget management process. They were transparently allocated within the budget revisions. That includes the £134 million of COVID funding, specifically ring-fenced for health. No funding currently in the Scottish Reserve relates at all to COVID-19 business support funding. Again, basic stuff that I might have thought a leader of an opposition party would have known. And lastly, Presiding Officer, Anna Sarwar accuses me of being selective in my quoting of the Audit Scotland reports. I've got it here. It's page 4. It's the actual report. I'm just going to read from it. The Scottish Government worked collaboratively and at pace with local and UK Government to direct significant public spending in difficult circumstances. It's critical that lessons are learned about what worked well and what needs to improve. Secondly, the Scottish Government streamlined governance arrangements to direct funds quickly, and it goes on to say, yes, it's hard to see how some financial decisions were reached, but that's because we were acting quickly because it was a global pandemic. Thirdly, the Scottish Government directed a large proportion of funding to councils and to other public bodies who had existing systems and local knowledge to enable them to spend quickly. And fourthly, the Scottish Government has managed its overall budget effectively. Yes, some COVID-19 funding remains unspent, but that's because this report didn't go up to the end of the financial year. Again, Presiding Officer, really basic stuff that I would have thought the Leader of the Opposition would have known.
Anna Sarwar.
Nicola Sturgeon can be as condescending as she likes. We're used to it, right? But the reality is she's selectively quoting on one page when the report makes clear that it's not clear where the COVID recovery money is going to be spent, and there are billions of pounds of reserves sitting in IJB accounts or in local government accounts. That is money that should be spent on the recovery. And on the spending review, it makes clear year after year after year that it's a standstill budget for the Scottish Parliament and for Audit Scotland, and that means, in real terms, a year after year budget cut for Audit Scotland, meaning clipping their wings. Now, no wonder Nicola Sturgeon wants to hide and distract from her failures, not focusing on the rising child and pensioner poverty on her watch, not focusing on the drugs deaths that have more than doubled on her watch, not focusing on the attainment gap that is still wide open on her watch, not focusing on the 700,000 people waiting on an NHS waiting list on her watch. Instead, what do we get? Not the Nicola Sturgeon we saw during the pandemic, but a return to the Nicola Sturgeon who wants to divide our country and pit Scot against Scot. After 15 years of this SNP government and 8 years as First Minister, when will she stop pretending she's in opposition and start governing for the people of Scotland?
First Minister. Forgive me, Presiding Officer, but when Anna Sarwar comes to this chamber and just makes basic errors, it's not condescending to point that out. It's not my job to hide the incompetence of the Leader of the Scottish Labour Party. It's my job to put facts in front of the Scottish people. Secondly, Anna Sarwar talks about this government's use of our own powers. He mentioned child poverty. Can I remind him that Scotland is the only part of the UK that has a child payment specifically to lift children out of poverty? And if Anna Sarwar wasn't prepared to continue to support the situation where welfare powers lie in the hands of Tory Prime Ministers and Chancellors, instead get them into the hands of this Parliament, then we could do more, and he might, just might, have a scrap more credibility. And on the issue of Scotland's right to choose, Anna Sarwar is perfectly entitled, although it's beyond me why he would want to, but he's perfectly entitled to team up with the Tories again to oppose independence. That is democracy. What he's not entitled to do is stand in the way of the Scottish people having the democratic right to choose. His position has him at odds with the trade union movement, with the STUC. It has him at odds with the constituency he would like to represent, where 60% of voters backed parties supporting a referendum. It has him at odds with his own party membership. A third of Scottish Labour voters support a second referendum on independence. It has him at odds with his own MSPs like Alec Rowley and Monica Lenny. Even Jackie Baillie said Labour were wrong to have done a deal with Better Together in the last campaign. But most fundamentally of all, Presiding Officer, Anna Sarwar's absurd position puts him at odds with any basic notion of democracy, and that's why he'll continue to struggle so badly.
We'll now move to general and constituency supplementaries, and I call Natalie Dawn.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government is supporting Scottish Breastfeeding Week and what steps are being taken to promote the Breastfeeding Friendly Scotland scheme.
First Minister.
Scottish Breastfeeding Week 2022 is being promoted with a programme of daily events and is supported by NHS boards and third sector partners. The highlight of the week was a breastfeeding celebration event held yesterday at which Marie Todd thanked over 120 delegates from health and the third sector. At that event, we also launched important resources for the promotion, protection and support of breastfeeding in Scotland. A theme running throughout the week is the promotion of the Breastfeeding Friendly Scotland scheme. Work continues to expand and promote the scheme from commercial premises such as shops and cafes to early years and school settings and to our local authorities.
Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Baby Jay was 11 weeks old when he died in West Lothian. In his short life, he suffered multiple broken bones and other injuries. In this ruling, a judge said there could only have been inflicted by his parents. A social worker and a nurse wanted baby J placed on the Child Protection Register before he was born. They were overruled. The judge expresses surprise that the council did not instruct a serious case review into his death. This tragedy happened in 2014, but it's only emerged thanks to the Sunday Times. No one has been held to account. Serious questions remain unanswered. First Minister, will you commit to ensuring a full and independent review now takes place and that its findings are made public?
First Minister.
These are tragic and horrific circumstances, and I want today to convey my deep condolences to the loved ones of baby J. It is really important in these circumstances that all lessons are learned fully. There are already independent processes in place to ensure that that is the case. In response to this question, of course, I will make sure that I satisfy myself that all of the necessary processes are in place to ensure that all lessons that need to be learned here, and clearly lessons need to be learned, are learned, and that any findings of any of these processes within, obviously, the bounds of confidentiality for families are indeed in the public domain.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week is the first ever Juvenile Idiopathic Arthritis Week, and I'd like to thank members for their support in promoting it and wearing purple, and the activists who have shared their personal stories too. 1 in 1,000 children in Scotland have JIA, so can I ask the First Minister to join me in thanking organisations such as Versus Arthritis and many others and clinicians working tirelessly for the work they're doing to support people living with JIA in Scotland, and ask what more the Scottish Government can do to raise awareness of this condition?
First Minister.
Can I thank Pam Duncan-Glancy for raising this really important issue? I think the first Awareness Week here is a real step forward and really important, and I'm delighted to support it. I'm also delighted to accept the invitation to pay tribute to organisations like Versus Arthritis, who do fantastic work to raise awareness of the issues that people with JIA experience, and also to support those in these circumstances. I will give a commitment to continue to work with charities and organisations like that to ensure that we do as much as possible to support people, and I'd be very happy to ask the Health Minister to discuss these issues further with Pam Duncan-Glancy, so that we are considering everything possible to increase support.
Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Aberdeen International Airport, Port of Aberdeen, Peterhead Port Authority and Aberdeen City and Shire Councils have put a bid together to bring a green free port to the north east of Scotland. This bid has the potential to boost GVA income by £7.5 billion, bring 30,000 jobs to the north east, and it will usher in a new era of investment, innovation, regeneration and opportunities for those that need them most across the north east of Scotland. While I'm aware the First Minister can't support any particular bid, can she give a commitment that the Government will give serious consideration to this bid, and will she join me in recognising the huge benefit the bid could bring to the north east of Scotland?
First Minister.
Can I thank I think we can hear the North East contingent in Parliament loudly and clearly. All bids will be treated extremely seriously. I can advise Parliament that applications for green Freeport status close on the 20th of June. All bids will be assessed jointly by the Scottish and the UK Government, with ministers jointly selecting the winning bids. As this is a competitive process, as Jackie Dunbar has indicated, I cannot comment on individual bids at this stage, but I would recognise the strong support that Jackie Dunbar has given to this one, which of course is of great interest to her constituents. I look forward to receiving strong bids from all around Scotland, with ambitious plans that will bring real benefits to Scottish businesses, workers and communities, and that will have a positive and lasting impact on Scotland's economy. A clear contribution to net zero through decarbonisation plans is a core requirement for green free ports, and applications should also demonstrate how they will deliver fair work or they will not be supported by the Scottish Government. So let me take the opportunity to wish all bidders well in this process.
Annie Wells.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My constituent, Brage Ward Foley, who suffers from spina bifida, had bladder surgery in April 2019. Since the initial operation, her bowel problems have worsened and the only option is further surgery. Brage is admitted to hospital on a 4-weekly basis as her bowels do not function without a nasogastric tube. but this treatment is both damaging and becoming less effective over time. And this experience has took an immense physical and mental toll on Breach, and she needs urgent assistance. Her consultants have informed Breach they are prepared for surgery. However, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board continue to delay her vital surgery. So, First Minister, what action could you take to assist my constituent in getting her surgery as quickly as possible?
First Minister.
I thank Harry Wells for raising this issue. I mean, clearly, as I hope she will appreciate, I don't know all of the details other than the details she has shared with me in Parliament right now. If she is willing and has the consent of her constituent to share those details and any additional relevant information with the Cabinet Secretary this afternoon, I will ensure that is looked into as a matter of urgency, that we liaise with the Health Board and give a detailed reply to Annie Wells as quickly as possible.
Pauline McNeill.
Thank you. This week, Callum Steele of the Scottish Police Federation described the pay offer to the police of £565 as derisory. In fact, he said police officers were disgusted at the offer. Police officers are considering taking action to demonstrate the palpable anger their members feel. And this is despite the police doing an exemplary job in the pandemic. And the First Minister referred to the crime figures earlier, on which I'm sure she gives the police some credit for. And this is despite warnings from the Police Federation that over 800 police officers are expected to take early retirement, and this is more than you would expect, because they feel overworked and undervalued. They refer to constant cancellation of their rest days and annual leave. If the government take this seriously, I ask the First Minister, what is she doing to make sure that police officers do not feel undervalued by this government? And what is she doing to make sure that we can prevent and encourage police officers to stay in the service and not take advantage of early retirement, because we need these officers on the front line?
First Minister.
Firstly, can I say that I pay tribute to police officers and support staff across the country. Their service is exemplary. I wouldn't just give them enormous credit for their contribution to the handling of the pandemic. I would give the police enormous credit to contributing to the well-being of our country. And Pauline McNeill is right to say that the figures I quoted earlier about having some of the lowest crime rates since the 1970s is in large part down to the efforts of the police. That is why we have a higher number of police officers in Scotland now than we did when this government took office. We have a higher number of police officers proportionately than other parts of the UK. The starting salary for police officers is higher in Scotland than it is elsewhere in the UK. But I want to see all public sector workers get the fairest possible pay increases, particularly at this time of soaring inflation. Pay negotiations across a range of the different parts of the public sector are underway right now, and I think it is obvious the Scottish Government, within the very limited resources we have, is seeking to secure as much fairness as possible. Unlike a government elsewhere in these islands, we value deeply the contribution of public sector workers. Specifically in relation to police officer pay is negotiated through the Police Negotiating Board. That has been the case for many years. That process is ongoing in relation to pay for 2022-23. It would not be appropriate for me in this chamber to cut across that. Following SPA board approval in late May, formal negotiations with trade unions commenced on the 2nd of June. So that process is ongoing, and I hope it delivers, as I would say about all groups in the public sector, the fairest possible outcome in the circumstances we are in.
Question number 3, Maggie Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's analysis is of the potential risks to Scotland's economy of the UK Government's proposed legislation to override the Northern Ireland Protocol.
First Minister.
The Scottish Government wasn't consulted by the UK Government before they took this action that risks a hugely damaging self-inflicted trade war in the middle of a cost of living crisis, and action which may very well breach international law. The UK Government is risking sanctions like targeted tariffs that would deeply harm Scottish businesses who are already dealing with an uncertain and unnecessarily bureaucratic environment thanks to Brexit. It's also very likely that it will end discussions across a range of other important issues, including access for our scientists and researchers to the EU's Horizon programme. Brexit has already made the cost of living crisis much worse, but by sparking a trade war, the UK Government risks exacerbating that crisis significantly, and I hope common sense and decency on the part of the UK Government quickly prevails.
Maggie Chapman.
I thank the First Minister for that response. By seeking to override parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol, the UK Government is putting the economic well-being of the north of Ireland behind their desire to impose their Brexit-infused British ideology on people. Such unilateral action also damages trust in politics. We know, as the First Minister has said, Brexit is already damaging Scottish businesses. Indeed, some businesses in the North East, in my region, have decided to stop all international business due to Brexit. What can we do to ensure that any actions by the EU in response to the UK riding roughshod over international treaties does not further damage Scotland's economy? And does she agree that independence for Scotland is now very clearly the best route to secure our country's position as an outward-looking and internationally responsible European nation?
First Minister.
Well, Maggie Chapman's question is absolutely correct. Everything she said is correct. The Northern Ireland Protocol, let us not forget, was negotiated and signed by this UK Government. It is also a protocol right now that is benefiting Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland's economy right now is doing better than the economies of the other countries in the UK. As First Minister of Scotland, if I could get a protocol that would allow Scotland to continue to trade freely across the single market, I would take that in a heartbeat. So that is the reality. We also have a government that is showing no respect for the rule of law, for international law, or for the basic norms of our democracy. I quoted from the letter from Christopher Geit, the now resigned ethics advisor to the Prime Minister. Let me quote just another line, because I don't know whether it is referring to the protocol, but it may be, where he says that this week he was tasked to offer a view about the government's intention to consider measures which risk a deliberate and purposeful breach of the ministerial code. That is what the UK Government is now behaving like. So can I finally, Presiding Officer, well, actually slightly disagree with Maggie Chapman. I don't think it is the case that independence is now the best route for us to secure our status in the European Union as an outward-looking country. I think independence is now our only route to doing that.
Question number 4, Emma Harper.
To ask the First Minister, in light of summer officially commencing next week on 21st of June, what action the Scottish Government is taking to promote responsible access to Scotland's countryside.
First Minister.
Well, it's very pleasing to see that summer may have unofficially commenced already in Scotland. Long may it continue. Nature Scot is the lead Scottish Government public body for access to the countryside. It works with the national parks and other key partners on raising awareness of the Scottish Outdoor Access Code. Last year, Nature Scot's traditional and social media activity saw over 15 million impressions, driving over 500,000 page views on the Scottish Outdoor Access Code website. A further campaign is already underway for this summer. It will inform campers of their responsibilities, including around people and pet behaviour and good practice in relation to fires and waste disposal.
Emma Harper.
I thank the First Minister for her response. More people will be enjoying Scotland's bonny countryside, but it is so important they do so responsibly. As the First Minister will know, my Livestock Worrying Act is now law and increases the penalties for those who allow dogs to worry or attack livestock. So will the First Minister join me in encouraging everyone to follow the Scottish Outdoor Access Code to keep their dogs under control when in the countryside? And will she join me in commending the vital work of the Scottish Partnership Against Rural Crime?
First Minister. Yes, these are really important points for Emma Harper to make. Of course, everyone should follow the access code, and it's worth pointing out, indeed, that access rights only apply to dog walking if the dog is under proper control. I do also commend the vital work of the Scottish Partnership Against Rural Crime, their livestock attack and distress campaign with the slogan "Your dog, your responsibility" to educate dog owners about the new legislation is key to awareness raising and bringing an end to the associated unnecessary suffering for all involved. Police Scotland and farming and crofting stakeholders combine their efforts to address these crimes, and the Scottish Government also campaigns with the SSPCA. The small minority who do not treat livestock with respect and care must be held accountable, and consequences must appropriately reflect the severity of their crimes.
Question number 5, Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister whether she will provide an update on the Scottish Government's policy regarding investment in nuclear fusion technology.
First Minister.
We're aware of the increasing interest in the development of fusion energy, which of course is different from traditional nuclear energy. We should never close our minds to new technology. It is clear, though, that there is a very long way to go still in terms of fully understanding both the risks and opportunities that fusion energy technology presents. The Scottish Government's position on traditional nuclear energy has not and will not change. We do not support the building of new nuclear power stations in Scotland, and therefore that will not feature as part of our wider energy strategy review due to be published later this year. We will continue to assess any such new technologies based on safety, value for consumers and contribution to Scotland's low-carbon economy and energy future.
Craig Hoy.
I thank the First Minister for that answer, but note that she is non-committal on fusion and will still use the planning system to shut down Scotland's traditional nuclear energy industry. Scientists at the UK-based Jet Technology have set a new record for the amount of energy produced in their quest to produce nuclear fusion. This offers the potential of virtually unlimited supplies of safe, low-carbon, low-radiation energy. Why won't the First Minister give a guarantee that her government will allow Scotland to benefit from this technology when it becomes commercially available? Or is caving in to the anti-science, anti-nuclear dogma of the Greens yet another price that she will pay for them propping up the SNP's plan for an illegal wildcat referendum next October?
First Minister. Members.
There's a real obsession on the part of the Tory benches today. I think they might be feeling a wee bit under pressure and uncomfortable because they know that a referendum will be legal and it is coming, Presiding Officer. On the issue at stake, however, yes, I'm non-committal on fusion energy. It would be irresponsible to be anything other because there is an awful long way to go before any of us fully understand either the risks or indeed the opportunities that that technology might present. It is probably decades before we could see any plants operating, and a lot of understanding needs to be built along the way. We will not close our minds, but nor will we jump to conclusions while that work has to be done. In terms of traditional nuclear energy, our position is well known. Let me just quote the chair of the Nuclear Consulting Group. The central message, repeated again and again, that a new generation of nuclear will be clean and safe is a fiction. The reality is nuclear is an extremely costly and inflexible technology with the potential to cause significant harm. We have massive renewable potential, and this government is going to focus on making sure we fully realise that.
Question number 6, Jackie Bailey.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government is doing to tackle the reported growing use of locum staff in the NHS.
First Minister.
The use of temporary staffing in the NHS, be that locum, agency or bank staff, is a very small fraction of NHS staffing. These temporary staff were vital during the height of the pandemic, not least to deliver our vaccination programme. The majority of temporary staffing cost comes from the NHS Staff Bank, who of course are NHS staff members on NHS rates of pay. Every health system has to make some use of temporary or agency staffing. Let me just illustrate that. In 2021, agency spending in NHS England was 23% higher than in Scotland, and in Labour-run Wales, agency spending was 79% higher than it was in Scotland. NHS staffing in Scotland is at a record high level, and as set out in our recent workforce strategy, we are committed to growing the NHS workforce further.
Jackie Bailey.
Can I thank the First Minister for her response, but remind her, of course, that people in this chamber are responsible for the NHS in Scotland, and perhaps she should spend her time focusing on that, because agency spend has risen to £423 million in 21-22, a 30% increase on the previous year. And yes, we have had a pandemic, but most of this is down to the increasing level of vacancies for nurses, doctors and consultants. The First Minister may be aware that currently nurses are quitting the NHS to work for private agencies who then in turn place them back in the NHS to cover staff shortages. They can earn more in a weekend than they do all week, working in the NHS. The consequences, more vacancies and more money wasted on sticking plaster solutions. So what action will the First Minister take to end the costly and growing use of agency staff in our NHS?
First Minister.
Firstly, Presiding Officer, I am responsible, this Government is responsible for NHS Scotland, but as I have said before, and I'm sorry to disappoint Labour, as I am sure I will say again, if Labour are coming to this chamber to say Labour would do things so much better, it is perfectly reasonable to look at the record in the part of the UK where Labour is currently in government and draw our own conclusions on whether that is true or not. Secondly, we have a record number of workers in our NHS, even taking account of vacancies. I'm talking about staff currently in post, increased under this government by almost 30,000. And yes, demand is growing. We've had a pandemic. That has meant some workers in our NHS have been off sick due to having COVID. It's meant that additional things, not least the vaccination programme, have had to be undertaken. I don't know what Jackie Baillie is suggesting, that we should just have left those posts somehow unfilled and not had those services delivered. Is that what a Labour government would do? If that is the case, then I think people will certainly draw conclusions from that. Final 2 points, Presiding Officer. The majority of temporary staffing comes from the staff bank. These are NHS staff on NHS contracts at NHS rates of pay. And finally, Jackie Baillie asked me, what action are we taking? Well, we have already acted to ensure record numbers of staff in our NHS, higher numbers of staff proportionately than in England and in Wales. And what we will do is continue to grow the NHS workforce so that it can meet the demands of the people of Scotland in the years to come.
That concludes First Minister's questions. There will be a brief pause before we move on to the next item of business, which is a members' business debate in the name of Christine Graham.
What does What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.